Well, rumor has it that winter will eventually end here in Indiana. It's what I hear. Maybe not, I don't know. But spring will come, and with it, we will see the unofficial Indiana state flower, the dandelion. At least that's what I always associated with Indiana. Even after I moved away, dandelions just everywhere. And the thing I remember is they were the easiest weed to pluck, but the hardest one to get rid of. Because you couldn't just pull out, obviously, the stalk and the flower. You had to get that root, or it would come right back. But if you pulled that off, at least to some degree, it looked like everything was taken care of. It looked like it was gone. And maybe you can think right away of what I'm talking about as it comes to an analogy of our Christian lives. I think so often we try to deal with the sins in our Christian lives by pulling at the weed versus getting down to the root. And it can have, in effect, the same kind of way that we can accomplish something that makes it look like everything's okay. But we can even think it's okay. But if we don't get the root, we know what's going to happen. It's not okay. There's still a problem that is there. And, we do that because it's not always even easy to deal with the root, the sin itself that you see, but it's definitely easier than dealing with the root of the problem. But that's what we have to do. Just like if you're a yard owner and your yard has the dandelions, you've got to get down to that one way or the other to truly tackle the problem. Well, we're going to see today, unless we deal with our root sin problem, our Christian life will never be what God makes possible. It will never be what He makes possible for us. And I word it that way specifically. I thought about what God intends, but sometimes we come at that from such God's up there and He's upset that it's not the way it should be. God's up there, it's not so much He's mad, He's sad. He wants to have this relationship with us. He knows what it can be, but He also knows what needs to happen. And even if our lives look good on the surface, if we don't deal with the root problem, it's not going to be all that it can be. And so I would ask you this morning, do you truly want to deal with sin in your life? Do you truly want to deal with all the ways that you miss the mark? Maybe the things you do, the things you don't do, but also that faith, trusting God, living a life, walking by faith. Do you want to live the life God desires for you? If so, we've got to find out what is this root problem and how do I deal with it? We're continuing in Mark. We're in chapter 10, verse 32 through 45 today. And as we look at this, again, this theme that we've seen in Mark is this focus that we have on the physical and Jesus had on the spiritual and how it just impacts everything we do. And it seems like we've reached the pinnacle of this the past few weeks as we look at this section. And it talks about one element of that, focus, different focus between physical and spiritual, the humility that should come with a spiritual focus. And we've said it is not, don't think when we talk about humility, when we talk about being humble, it means, I don't brag. That is not it. It's this idea that I am aware of my limitations. God is God and I'm not, and everything that includes that I need to surrender to Him. I need to rely upon Him. I need to live my life with that faith. Humility is recognizing I need to surrender and rely on Him. Well, faith is living that out. And then also, certainly, putting others first. That side of humility comes up over and over, and it plays right into this major theme throughout the entire New Testament. The answer, what should be the answer to Jesus' true Lord's Prayer, is that we would be one, that we would have this unity that's essential to be the church that God intends us to be. And so we're going to look at this passage today and see what is this root problem. And I'll tell you again, the word itself isn't in this passage. But you need to look at this in the way that you reflect on what is it talking about, even without using that specific word. So Mark chapter 10, starting at verse 32, it says, they were on the road going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking ahead of them. And they were amazed, and those who followed were afraid. Well, why are they amazed? It seems the disciples were amazed, and those who followed were afraid. Why? Well, remember, where have we said that Jesus is on His way to? I realize that ended with a preposition, but hey, sometimes it happens. Where's Jesus headed? Jerusalem. What's going to happen? Is death. Yeah, he knows that. They don't know that, but they do know he's going there. The messianic expectations are high, and the Jewish, leaders' hatred of him is also high. Something is going to happen, and so they're amazed that he would. And notice Jesus was walking ahead of them. He is leading the way here, and so they're amazed that he's doing that. He's going down to face them, and they're afraid of what might happen. The crowds love Jesus. They know the Pharisees hate Jesus. Something is going to happen, and that's why the amazement and the being afraid. And it says then, taking the 12 again, so taking them aside, away from the crowd, he began to tell them what was going to happen to him, saying, "See, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him over to the Gentiles. And they will mock him and spit on him and flog him and kill him, and after 3 days he will rise." Now, this is the third time that Jesus has predicted, has just came out and said, "I'm going to die." And this time he adds more details than he ever has in terms of some of the things, and certainly the Gentile element there. The key difference here, though, is the response of the disciples. Each time it's been a little different. You remember the first time Jesus said he was going to die? What was the responses, particularly of Peter that time? Yeah, it ain't going to happen. It says Peter rebuked Jesus right after saying, "Oh yeah, by the way, you're the Christ." Yeah, and then, "Oh, but you're wrong." And then the second time, you remember what happened then? He says it again, last chapter. And the response of the disciples, you remember? Okay, what happened? Catch the one with the sore throat. Yeah. It says that they didn't understand, but they were afraid to ask. So they didn't say anything, but they didn't understand, and they wanted to. They wanted to, "Jesus, what's going on?" But they were afraid to, because he's been talking about, "Hey guys, you just aren't getting it. You aren't getting it." Like, well, we don't want them to know we aren't getting it. And especially they're about to argue over who's the greatest. Well, I don't want to, I can't be the greatest and the dumbest at the same time. That just doesn't really work. And so no one would say anything. And so this time there's nothing said. So there's definitely this progression here that, maybe they've come to accept it. At least they've come to accept that they don't understand. What's he talking about? It doesn't seem like maybe they thought this is one of those metaphors. A camel can't go through the eye of the needle. I'm going to go there and I'm going to be killed. Maybe it's that same thing. They don't know, but they've come to accept that they don't know to a larger degree than before. So from the external perspective, at least, that's what's happening with the disciples. Now, notice the context that this gives. Always look at the first part of any section. And so here, realize as we get ready to see the rest of this, we are talking about Jesus here, the Son of Man, which they don't know all that title entails, but we certainly do as we look at it. It is a divine title. Jesus, the Son of God, in the image of man, coming down to earth. And think of, Philippians 2, humbling himself, emptying himself, as Eric read. This idea of that's what he did, and coming to earth, and then willingly going to Jerusalem where he knows he's going to die. So that's what Jesus is doing. That's his mindset. This humble mindset of sacrifice for the good of others, for the exaltation of others. Compare that then. Verse 35. And James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came up to him and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." Wow, like a total open-ended. That we talk about blank. I talk about blank check Christianity. This is the opposite. God, we want you to sign a blank check. And they said he said to them, "What do you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us to set one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory." And Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drank, or be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized?" And they said to him, "We are able." And Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink you will drink, and with the baptism with which I am baptized you will be baptized. But to set at my right hand or my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those whom it has been prepared." Now, on the one hand here, this should be absolutely amazing to us that they would ask for this after what they had seen and experienced just immediately prior and very recently. As Jesus has just talked about his own death. And again, whatever it means, it can't be a good thing. Even if it is a metaphor, it's certainly not like great things are going to happen to me. And then immediately after, hey, could we get this from you, Jesus? I mean, isn't there some time that we always say, too soon to talk about something? Something terrible's happened. You don't bring up something right away. Yeah, you would think there'd be a little time there, but no. He's also talked about, in chapter 10, the first shall be last and the last shall be first. Well, that made a big impression, obviously. And you go back a little further, you will not even receive the kingdom unless you receive it like a child with that humility that we've talked about. And then, of course, the chapter before, they ask, who's the greatest? They're arguing over who's the greatest. And he says, to be the greatest, you must be the servant of all. Everything that Jesus has said, they missed it. But that's also part of the point today. That it looks to them, at least, like everything's fine. To some degree, they've plucked the weed and think things are okay. We're following Jesus. He's going down to Jerusalem. Things are coming to a head. We're willing to suffer with you. We know something could happen here, or we would back off. We wouldn't go with you. But they don't realize what's still underneath the surface. And that should be certainly a lesson for us. It's easy for us to think everything is fine when below the surface is still this root problem that is so ingrained. It has just been there for so long. It is so deep. It's so central to who we are, at least the sin part of us that remains. It's still there. This physical focus is so pervasive that, again, their request actually makes sense. If Jesus is going down there to set up a kingdom, which they still can't get out of their mind. We don't know what you're talking about, Jesus, this whole dying thing. But you're going down there, and they've just said, in your glory, they've still got it in mind, the kingdom is coming, and it totally makes sense. If the Messiah is going to set up a physical kingdom, then we need to make our requests for our spots. And what do we know about James and John? What have we seen a couple times where they've been set apart? Remember, who were the inner three that Jesus took? James, John, and Peter. And so they're thinking, we got a good chance of this. We're already been singled out. Let's put our names in now. Let's get it assured right now. Get a sort of a oral handshake. Hey, let's go. We're going to be in these prime spots. And so it causes them to miss how totally opposite of Jesus they are. Obviously, they don't think what they're doing is wrong, but what they're doing is so completely opposite of Jesus, of his nature, of his focus. How could someone be so blind? Well, whenever you ask that of anyone in the Bible, be sure you ask the same question of yourself. Because however they could be so blind, I can be blind in the same way. So yeah, it's how could they be so blind? Find out, because there's a good chance it's affecting me the same way. Well, you look then in verse 41, and when the 10 heard of it, they began to be indignant at James and John. Big surprise there, right? They find out James and John asked for these chief seats. What do you expect? And I think what it is, they're mad. Why are they mad? Well, maybe because they didn't think of it. I should have asked him, oh man. Or maybe that James and John broke some unwritten agreement that they had. Like, all right, guys, we won't jockey for position. We'll just let Jesus decide. But James and John go up there and, make their case, make their plea for that special position. So they're indignant at them, what's that do to the group dynamic? They all getting along? No. So here you have this group that's meant to be this close group of people, and there's tension, there's strife, there's turmoil, disunity. And so we see where this attitude, how it manifests itself. And Jesus called them and said to them, "You know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Jesus says, listen, I realize this is what you see all around you. He talks about the Gentiles, the world, the way the world does things, is they all seek to lord it over everyone else. Now, you might say today, some people are starting to realize, you can read some books on leadership today, and there's people that realize, hey, a leader should be one who's leading the people, doing what they're doing, not just standing there yelling at them out in front. And so there's some people who get it today, but all truth is God's truth. They've recognized this other way doesn't work. But by and large, you still see this. Of the world, anything contrary to God says, no, a leader is one who just yells directions, doesn't really understand, doesn't try to understand. Jesus says that's not the way it works in my kingdom. That's the physical world, the physical focus. It's not the spiritual focus. He says here, "But it shall not be so among you. Whoever would be great among you must be your servant. Whoever would be first must be slave of all." That's one of the many paradoxes of Christianity, isn't it? How do you become great? By being a servant, by being a slave, by becoming last. That goes against what we hear. We in the song, it talked about how do you truly live? By dying. How do you be free? By making yourself a slave. Everything from a physical focus, it doesn't make sense. From a spiritual focus, it makes total sense. This is the different dynamic that the kingdom has, that Jesus has, that God has, that it's so hard for us to grasp because everywhere around us we see the opposite. They saw the opposite. They were doing just what they saw, what made sense. That's why they didn't think there was anything wrong with, hey, Jesus, can we have these prime seats? That's the way it works, right? Well, it's not the way it works with Jesus. And there was something that was keeping them from realizing that. Verse 45, Jesus says, "For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Again, the Son of Man, a reference to his divinity. If anyone deserved, Jesus humbled himself enough to even come to earth. Don't you think the least that we could do here on earth is just to serve him, to pamper him, everything that he did? If God's going to come to earth, we should make his stay as pleasant and as wonderful as possible. He deserves that. Well, he did, but he didn't even ask for it. And not only that, is it not the most comfortable stay? Was he not the richest person to ever live, in the highest place of position and power? But he ultimately dies for us. He says, this is the model. This is the mindset, the spiritual mindset you need to get and that you're missing so badly. So back to this idea, unless we deal with our root sin problem, our Christian life will never be what God makes possible. Well, what is our root sin problem? What is it? It's not in the text. That one and she's going to speak up. Pride, yeah. Did you get the clue I gave there with the word sin? You can't really notice it, but the I is capital, S-I-N. At the middle of sin is I. Well, I don't think it's a coincidence. At the middle of pride is I. Me. It's all about me. Pride is the root sin problem. And it's how, again, it's not in this text. You don't see the word there, but what have we been seeing over and over? We've been seeing the need for humility. Well, the opposite of humility is pride. Humility is the key, as we said last week. If we don't get this, if we miss this, we miss everything. It's the key to living the Christian life. Pride is the root of our sin. It's the root that keeps us from living the Christian life. As we look at this, I saw a couple things here. First of all, we can and will change many things about ourselves. I just couldn't help but noticing this progression that Jesus says, I'm going to die. And at first, Peter rebukes him. At second, they don't understand it and they want to find out. They certainly don't agree with it. They want to question him, but no, don't want to risk my reputation. And then now this time there's nothing said. It seems like to some degree they've accepted, they've changed. I don't understand, but all right, whatever, Jesus. Not going to fight you on this one. Not even going to question you on this one. Not even thinking about it this time. And so there's that progression. And so the point seems to be that the disciples have made some change on something that's super important to them. The last thing they really want to happen is for the Messiah to die. That would throw everything off. They don't, and not just because they like him. Their whole idea of what his kingdom should be like, that upends everything. But they've made some change here. We can change many things about ourselves. And we look at ourselves. I think a common thought when it comes to becoming a Christian is that I'll have to change, right? And for some people then, they don't even want to become a Christian. Why? Well, I don't want to change. And so they say, either they just, well, there's not enough evidence, I don't believe, whatever it is, when really they just don't want to accept what happens. It's not a matter of the mind, it's the heart. Some might just come out and say it. No, not going to become a Christian, don't want to give up what I'm doing. Well, I think for us who do become Christians, we still fall into that trap. We do accept, all right, to become a Christian, I have to change a lot of things, but we think that's the focus. It's not the focus. Becoming a Christian is not just about this idea, I have to change this, not do this. There's certainly that transformation that needs to happen, but it's to allow for this relationship that God has always desired. And unfortunately, we get the same superficial mindset. To become a Christian means I have to change. Well, look how much I have changed. I've got this Christian thing down. Look how many dandelions I pulled. The yard was full of them, and now you don't see any of them. I got this Christian thing. I'm living the Christian life. No. We can and will change a lot of things about ourselves. And so on the surface, you look and you don't see the issues, the problems. We all live pretty stand-up lives. People look at us and say, yeah, good neighbor, good person, good friend. Yards, don't see any dandelions. We can get to that point, but we're missing out on what God truly wants. We're missing out on this dynamic relationship He wants to have. We're missing out on the fact that God says it's not just about not sinning, not doing this. If God didn't want sin in the world, I say it over and over and over, if that was His goal, He wouldn't have created us. He knew what was going to happen and still did it. He wanted a relationship, and He still does. That's the most important thing. Now, our sin causes us not to be able to experience that relationship to its fullest. So yes, He wants us to change and be transformed so we can have that relationship. That's the focus. That's the purpose. But if we focus on just don't do this or do this, it's just pulling the tops of the dandelions and never getting to the root. I think it's made worse by the focus that people like me, preachers, teachers, put on the what versus the how and the why. Here's what to do, what not to do. Pull that weed, everything will be great. And it doesn't get deeper than that. It's made worse by the fact that we can read the Bible on just that observation level and apply, and we don't reflect what are the deeper truths that help us deal with the deeper problems. So this potential is there, and we need to realize just because I don't see any dandelions in my yard doesn't mean there's not a problem. We can and will change many things about ourselves before we give up our pride. Before we give up our pride. And just like I said with humility, one of the biggest problems is we don't understand what pride is. We think humility is not bragging, and so pride is bragging. Yeah. Look at that person. He's so prideful. He's so arrogant. All the time just talks about how great he is, how good he does at this, how much money he has, how position, he's so prideful. Is that pride? Yeah, that's a manifestation of pride, but the same thing. That's like the dandelion. And so we don't do that, and so we think, everything's okay. No, it's the root that's the real problem. And just pride is the opposite of humility. So it's the opposite of what we said. Humility is being aware of my limitations, so pride is not being aware of my limitations. Now, I would never come out and say, I'm God, but I do things that in some sense acts like God. I don't fully surrender to Him. I have expectations, and I might retreat a little bit of God, okay, I can't expect total health and absolute wealth, but you shouldn't ever let me get this sick, this young, this long. God, I won't be totally wealthy, but I shouldn't lose my house. It shouldn't go on this. No, we still, there's an element of us. That's still pride. God, you're God and I'm not, but this really relies on me. Not taking time to rest, that's pride. It all depends on me. I'm relying on me. That's pride. All of these ways, and we don't think about that. You aren't bragging if you're doing that, but that's not what it is. It's this underlying thing that says, again, I don't surrender to God. I don't rely on Him the way I should. That's pride. That's what it is. And then the same thing, not putting others first. And so why does Jesus talk about over and over? Being the servant of all, being last. The first shall be last, the last shall be first. That element, again, putting others first. To be prideful means I don't do that. Has nothing to do with whether I brag or not. But I don't truly put others first as I think about these things. Which means, again, I'm not truly surrendered. I've just sort of retreated. I've said, okay, I've become a Christian. Oh, that's just an extreme. I can't do that anymore, so I sort of pull back a ways. But I haven't surrendered to God. I'm not fully humble. I'm not fully trusting Him. That's the root and that's the core of the problem that keeps us from experiencing the life God intends for us. This is what it is. So until we deal with this, we're always going to have something. It might not be as obvious as before with a yard full of dandelions, but it's still there. There's still a problem. And one of the things that makes it worse is we think more of what we should do for God than what He wants to do for us. I feel like that is true with every Bible passage we talk about, every sermon I give. We hear it from this perspective of, I'm not doing what God wants me to do, what God says I should do. He's up there upset at me. I need to change. I need to do this. And that's the way we hear this, and it's this guilt dynamic. When God is up in heaven, and yes, He is holy, and there's that obligation, but once again, if He didn't want sin, don't create us. He's saying, I created you to have this relationship. Yeah, you're not doing what you should be doing. You should be doing it, though, so you can experience this relationship that I've wanted. I know I was holy before I created you. It's been, in one sense, again, it's introduced sin into the world to create you, but I wanted to do that. I wanted to create you because I wanted that relationship. It was worth it to me. And so we've got to hear all of these things through that lens. Or once again, it's this idea of pride. Well, the focus is on me, and I better get it better. Where God says, no, the focus is on me as God. What I offer you, what I can do for you, what I want to do for you. If you put it on you and your works, you're missing the point while trying to get to the point. You're missing the point of the Christian life, trying to live the Christian life. If your idea of the Christian life is, I've got to quit doing this and quit doing this, I've got to try harder to be better, to do more. That's no. You've got to trust me more. You've got to surrender to me and rely on me. Let me help you experience this relationship more. Let me provide for you and bless you, and you worship and glorify me. That's what I've intended all along. Anything else is missing the mark. And you don't realize it because it's underneath the surface. It's not those dandelions. A person who's trying to live a better life for God, to use this analogy, what kind of yard could look better than that, right? But underneath the surface, if I'm trying to live better for God and that's my focus, that's the most prideful thing I could do. It's all about me doing better for God. No, it's not. But that's the pride that we don't see and is hard to get rid of. Keeps us from experiencing this Christian life. Now, what does Christian mean? We talk about being Christian. What's it mean? follower of Christ, Christ-like, right? You know, they were first called Christians. Why? Because they were acting like Christ. You know, it's where it comes from. Christ, Christian, Christ-like. Well, again, there was certainly that element. He didn't do wrong and did what was right, but he lived in this incredible relationship with the Father. That's what we need to get to. That's where our focus needs to be. He relied upon God the Father for everything. Even as the Son of God himself, he realized in coming to earth, he needed to rely on him. He surrendered to him in all. I come not to do my own will, but that of the Father. That's what we're trying to get to. The sin just interferes with it. Yeah, I can get that out of the way so I can see it clearly, but that's what I need to be looking at and striving for. And the same thing, if we have this pride that puts the focus on us, not only is it going to keep us from personally experiencing that relationship God wants to have, it's going to keep us as a group of Christians, as a church, from having unity. Everything that people have done throughout this chapter that has demonstrated a lack of humility, that has shown this root of pride, has also caused disunity. You know, even starting with divorce. You know, the lack of humility to listen to what God says, to surrender to what he says, you know, the ultimate disunity of a husband and wife. And as it goes through then, and even the rich young ruler, you know, you get that pride. Well, it's all about what I've done. Well, we see how, you know, what that leads to. I've done it. Other people haven't. You're good, Jesus. I'm good. The rest of them, not so much. No unity there. You have here the disciples, two of them asking, you know, can we set it the right and left? What do the others do? They get indignant. Here's this group that's supposed to be tighter than a family. They're not then, because these people were acting out of that pride. It will never have the unity that Jesus prayed for and is absolutely essential to our witness if we have pride and don't have humility. This is it. Just like I said last week, you know, humility is the key. Well, pride's the opposite key. Having humility, getting rid of pride. This is where we need to focus. And, you know, we've been using this idea of the root. Well, what's the root problem of this root problem we've been talking about? And I think it's just like the dandelions. You know, it is so easy to pick a dandelion, isn't it? I could clean up my yard, you know, whatever, 10 minutes. Have the whole yard looking great if I just go through and pluck them all out. Same thing with my life. It's easier. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's definitely easier to deal with those surface actions that other people see. To live a life that gets me to the point that as far as you can see, I'm doing okay. I'm guessing I look pretty okay to most. You don't know what I deal with through the week. You don't know the anger that goes through my mind at times, the lust that I battle, the impatience, you know, again, all of these things that come from pride. It should be this way, and it's not. What's up? All of that. It's easy to deal with those surface things. It's more comfortable. It's more agreeable. Yeah, God, I know. You know, don't swear in front of people. All right, got that one down. Yeah. But to really deal with the issue is far more difficult. And so the true key, how do I get at the root? How do I even determine I'm going to get at the root? And what finally gets me to that point? I think this is it, that I settle for nothing less than the relationship God desires and intends. I'm at the point where my yard looks pretty good to my neighbors. My life as a Christian looks pretty good to you all. I don't want to settle for that because I know what's still inside me. I know what's still there. And the only way I'm going to deal with that, if my goal is just to look okay to you, I've gotten there already. I look okay to most of you. Not on the physical side, I know, but hey, this is what you get. My life looks okay. If that's my goal, I'm done. Do you want to settle for that? I want to get to the point where my Christian life looks okay to those who don't know me very well. No. I don't want to settle for anything less than the relationship God intends for me to have with Him. That's my goal. And so what will I do? What do I need to do? Do I want the relationship God desires to have with me at any cost? And here are the two costs I thought of. First of all, the cost of examining. There's a cost to looking at my life and asking, is it the way it should be? Is there still that root of pride that's there that I haven't dealt with yet? There's a cost. Part of that cost is I've got to open myself up to others because I am truly convinced I cannot examine myself alone. That's why I don't say self-examination anymore. I say examination of self. Because I can't just do it on my own. I need someone close to me who I let, and they're able to speak into me and see me and say, hey, Steve, here's where I still see that root, that below the surface stuff, which around some of them, my wife and others, isn't always below the surface. They have no, you might think I'm okay. They know I'm not okay. I need someone like that. Hey, what do you see? I'm not going to settle for, hey, they don't say anything at church. What do you see? What am I missing? Examination of self. Think about it. How do I examine my own humility? Yeah, I'm very good at being humble. If I think I'm good at being humble, am I good at being humble, or I just think I'm good at, I've got to have someone getting their perspective. So am I willing to pay the cost of examination of myself, which again means spending some time with people, hearing some things I'd rather not hear. I'd rather have you all saying, wow, Steve, your life looks so great, and sit down with that person who knows me better and say, here's what you still need to work on. Am I willing to pay that cost? And then the cost of changing. The cost of transforming. Once they point it out, what do I need to do? Why isn't our first response to get at the root of a dandelion? Because it's way harder to get at the root. I got to dig it out. I got to get some spray. I can pluck it like that. It's done. It's the same thing with my life. Once I find out, okay, here's some of that root that's there, that root of pride, I've got to make some changes. I've got to transform. That's not going to be easy, or I would have done it already. Am I willing to pay that cost? So again, if my goal is just to look good to you, I'm not. But if my goal is nothing less than the relationship God desires to have with me, then all right, I'll pay that cost of changing and transforming. And so as we have our time of decision and invitation, that's the decision I invite you to make. I want to settle for nothing less. I'm willing to pay the cost of examining and pay the cost of changing. And it starts, if you're here today and you have not accepted Christ personally, it starts there. It does no good to, okay, I'm going to work on changing my life if I haven't committed my life to Christ, if I haven't surrendered to Him.